This program is sponsored by North Valley Church of Christ.
There's a message true and glad for the sinful and the sad. Ring it out, ring it out, ring it out, ring it out. It will give them courage new, it will help them to be true. Ring it out, ring it out, ring it out, ring it out.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Redeeming the Time. I'm your host, Chris Macy, and I am the minister with the North Valley Church of Christ. If you are just now finding us, again, welcome here. Pull up a chair, stay seated, whatever you might be doing, or maybe you're out on a walk listening to me on your headphones. Stick around. If you were with me last week, I want to ask you something before we get started, and I want you to answer to yourself honestly, because nobody is listening to your mind but you and the Lord. How did it go? Last week, we started a series called Daily Roots. The whole idea is that growing in Christ is mostly not about big, dramatic moments. It's about small, ordinary, repeatable things that you come back to on a regular Tuesday, and that over the years send your roots down deep enough that the wind, can't take you down. And last week's root was beginning the day with God. And I had asked you to try it out for 7 days, from Tuesday to Tuesday. Guard the front of the day, the first fruits. Put the phone in another room and give 10 honest minutes to the Lord. So how did it go? I'm sure some of you did it every single morning. Maybe you were already doing it, so it was easy, and you're feeling good about yourself. That's great. I want you to enjoy that. Maybe some of you did it, 4 days out of 7. Some of you meant to start Monday or Tuesday, and then it came about, and it happened to you that day. And here we are on the other side of the whole week, and you never did it. And here's what I said last week, and I'm going to say it again, because it's the most important sentence of the whole series. When you miss, you don't start over. Don't ever think of it like that. You just start again. Tomorrow morning, no speech, no penance, no dragging yourself over the coals. You just come back. And that's true of everything we're going to talk about in these coming weeks. Roots don't grow because you were perfect. They grow because you kept coming back to the same spot. So today we move to the second root in our tree that we're growing, our little stubble maybe that's coming up and shooting out of the ground. And it's a close cousin to the first one last week. And it's going to be a fixed time for prayer. And I want to say up front what this is not. This is not a program about long, elaborate, beautifully worded prayers. There's nothing wrong with those. But if you ever sat in a service and heard somebody pray and thought, well, I could never do that, I want you to take that weight off of you today. What we're talking about is the quiet power of a short, consistent appointment with God. Short, consistent, and most importantly, kept. And that's it. And I want to convince you today that a 2-minute prayer you actually pray every day at the same time will do more for your life over 5 years than a 45-minute prayer you get around to when you're desperate. Okay? So I want us to start with some scripture reading. And the first one is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. There he says, "And when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. So do not be like them. for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 4. The king has just asked Nehemiah what it is he wants. And it says there, then the king said to me, what would you request? And Nehemiah prays, so I prayed to the God of heaven. And in that moment, we know that was a short, quick prayer, because then he answers the king the request. And you don't keep a king waiting. Now back over to Matthew again, Matthew chapter 9, verses 37 and 38. Then Jesus said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. And you'll find that same call in Luke chapter 10, verse 2. And you'll find the same urgency in John chapter 4, when Jesus tells the disciples to lift up their eyes and look on the fields, because they are already white for harvest. Now, we're going to begin with what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, because I think a lot of us are carrying around, a bad idea, and it needs to come off before anything else will fit. Jesus is cutting through the notion that prayer works by volume. He says that the Gentiles suppose that they would be heard for their many words. They believe that if you talk long enough, loud enough, and use the right phrases enough times, eventually you'd wear the deity down and get his attention, just to get rid of you. You can see it in the Old Testament. Remember the prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel, calling on their God from morning until noon, and then all afternoon cutting themselves, working themselves into a frenzy, and Elijah stands over there mocking them. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's on a journey. Maybe he's relieving himself. Call louder. He's using sarcasm to poke fun at what they think, because it's so wrong. So wrong. And then you compare what they did for all morning and most of the afternoon, and then Elijah prays. You know how long he prayed? Read it sometime. It's about 60 words, and God answers. That was it. And now on to what Jesus says, the difference. What he says the difference is, he does not say don't be like them because your prayers should be shorter. He's not saying that. He says, do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. That's the whole thing right there. That's the reason. You're not talking to a distant power who has to be persuaded to care. You are talking to your Father. He already knows what you need, and who was already inclined toward you before you even opened your mouth. He wanted to hear from you. Now think about what that does to the pressure. If God has to be convinced, then prayer is a performance. The length matters. The word choice matters. And you'd better get it right. You'd better get it right. But if he already knows, then prayer is not performance. It is fellowship. And here's the practical fallout of that. If your Father already knows what you need, then you do not have to wait until you have 30 uninterrupted minutes and a clear head and a well-organized list. You can come with what you've got when you've got it. Which brings us to a man standing in a very tight spot. So we're back to Nehemiah and the prayer you do not have time for. Nehemiah chapter 2. You need to know the setting, or you may walk past this, so we're going to go through this. Nehemiah is the cupbearer to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. That's not a servant job the way we would picture it. The cupbearer stands closest to the most powerful man on the face of that area, in this case, face of the earth, really. And it's a position of enormous trust. And it's also a position where a wrong move ends you, like the cupbearer for Pharaoh in Egypt. And Nehemiah has been carrying a heavy heart. He's heard that the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and the gates are burned with fire. And he has been weeping and fasting and praying over it for days. You can read about that in chapter 1. It's a long one. It's a good one. So he confesses. He quotes the covenant he pleads. And here's the thing. He prayed that long prayer probably for months and nothing had happened yet. Then one day he's serving wine and the king looks at him and notices his face is sad. And in that court, that's kind of dangerous for the king to notice because he doesn't want that. He wants to be a happy king. So Nehemiah himself says he was very much afraid. The king says, "What would you request?" Now, stop there. Everything Nehemiah has been praying about for months comes down to the next 15 seconds. And there's no time to withdraw. There's no time to go find a quiet place and kneel. He's standing in front of the throne with a cup in his hand, and the king is waiting. Mark what Scripture says. Nehemiah says, "So I prayed to the God of heaven." And then the very next verse, "And I said to the king." So between the king's question and Nehemiah's answer, he prayed. That prayer could not have been more than a breath. There's no record of the words. It might have been, "God help me." It might have been nothing more than a look upward on the inside. And the breath of a prayer changed the course of a nation. Nehemiah walks out of that room with a letter from the king, timber from the king's forest, an escort of officers, and Jerusalem gets its wall back. And I want you to hold Elijah's 60 words and Nehemiah's one breath together in your mind for just a moment. Because between the two of them, they demolish the objection that I hear more than any other. I don't have time to pray. I don't have time. You have time for that kind of prayer. God actually answers. You got time for it. You have always had time. What you don't have time for is the impressive version. And God never asked you for that impressive version. He's not asking for that. Now, let's go on to Matthew chapter 9. And this is where the whole, this is where I want us to go to practical. Jesus has been going through all the cities and villages, teaching and preaching and healing. And then Matthew tells us that he saw the crowds and he felt compassion for them because they were distressed, right? They were dispirited, like sheep without a shepherd, the text tells us. And that's a picture, again, worth for us to stop and think about. Sheep without a shepherd are not vicious. They're just lost. They're vulnerable and wandering around, and they don't even know it. Look around the valley here sometime. Sit in traffic on the 101 and look at the cars going by. That's who Jesus was looking at. And out of that compassion, he turns to the disciples and he says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." Now notice, he doesn't say the harvest is small. He doesn't say people are hard and nobody's interested. He says the harvest is plentiful. The problem is not the field's end. The problem is on the worker's end. Again, notice what he tells them to do about it. He does not say, now go start a program. He does not say, organize a committee. Pray. Ask the Lord of the harvest. Now, here's the part I think is one of the most quietly convicting things in the New Testament. We read on into Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, right after Jesus says, pray for the Lord to send out workers. He summons his 12 disciples and sends them out. They prayed for workers. They became the workers. And so understand what you're signing up for. when you pray this prayer. You are volunteering. You may not mean to be, but you are. And God has a long history of answering that prayer by tapping the shoulder of the person praying it. But look at how simple that prayer is. Lord of the harvest, send out workers into your harvest. 11 words. Any believer listening to my voice can pray that right now from your car, from a parking lot, standing at a sink, standing in line, at the desk in your office. You don't need a degree. You don't need good vocabulary. You need 11 words in about 4 seconds, maybe less. Which brings me to a man who built a habit out of exactly that. When I was in preaching school, the dean of that school had a habit I have never forgotten. And I'll be honest, I have to confess, his name slipped away. I was putting this together and I kept thinking, what is his name? It was Charles. Oh man, I can't remember his last name. It was Charles something. It's been a long time. I could look it up, but I can't right now. So that happens. But what did not slip away? The habit. All these years later, I can still hear his little alarm. He had a small alarm set on his watch, and it went off twice a day. Every morning at 9:38 a.m. and every afternoon at 4:35 p.m. And those two times were not random, not even a little bit. 9:38 a.m. pointed him and reminded him of Matthew chapter 9, verse 38. Beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. And then chapter 4, verse 35 4:35 p.m. pointed him to John chapter 4, verse 35. Lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for harvest. He turned the clock itself into a Bible reference. The time of day became the verse. And when that alarm went off, it did not matter where he was. Classroom, office, hallway, middle of a conversation. And I'll tell you exactly what that looked like, because it's probably not what you're picturing. The watch would beep. And it's not like beep real loud. It's a little watch. Dee, dee, dee. You can barely hear it. But we did hear it, especially in a classroom when everyone's quiet. He would say, excuse me. He would look down at his wrist. You could see him stop the alarm. And that was it. A moment. No longer than it takes a man to check the time. Then he looked back up and picked up the conversation right back up where he left it. He had already prayed silently in his own mind in the space of that glance. There was nothing dramatic about it. He never announced it. Well, I shouldn't say he never. He did eventually let us know. But he never made anybody wait while he prayed out loud over these things. If you'd been standing there and you didn't know him, you'd have assumed the man had an appointment coming up and thought nothing more about it. Most people probably never did know. We knew. We were his students, and we'd been around him long enough to figure it out. And if anybody had ever asked him about it, he had gladly told them what it was for. That's what makes the whole thing worth telling. It cost him really nothing. It interrupted no one. And he had been doing it for years. Here's what I want you to see about that habit. It was not dramatic. A glance at the wristwatch twice a day. If you added up every second that man spent on that particular prayer in a year, it would not even come to an hour. It was not long. 11 words. But it was consistent. Day after day, year after year, semester after semester of students coming and going. And that consistency did something. It kept the urgency of lost people and the need for laborers standing right in front of his heart at all times. You could hear it in how he taught. You could hear it in how he prayed for us. He never quite lost sight of the fields. because twice a day, every day, something made him look up at them again. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not telling you that you should go set your watch to 9:38. That was his. You might pick a different time and a different verse, and it would be just as good. You can do the 9:38 if you wanted. What I'm telling you is that the man had a fixed point, and that fixed point had a way of holding him. So let's talk about why this works, because I think there's a real principle underneath it. A short, consistent appointment does something that a long, occasional prayer usually cannot. It builds rhythm. Think about how much of your life already runs on rhythm rather than decision. You didn't decide to brush your teeth this morning. You didn't weigh it. You didn't pray about it. You just did it because for 30 or 50 or 70 years, you've done it at that spot in the day, and your body knows where it goes. Now, that's not shallow. That's how God made us. We are creatures of habit down to the bone, and the question is never whether you'll have habits. The question is only which ones. So a fixed time trains your heart to turn Godward at the same moments every day until the turning becomes something close to automatic. Not rote, automatic. And here's the effect of that. Your day stops running purely on its own momentum. Without a fixed point, I should say. A day is just one thing pushing into the next thing from the moment your feet hit the floor until you fall into bed wondering where it all went. With a fixed point, there are places in the day where you deliberately look up. I think of it like the survey markers you see out in the desert. A surveyor doesn't guess. He works from fixed points that don't move. And everything else gets measured from those. Take away the markers, and every measurement after that drifts a little, and you don't notice the drift until you're long way off. Fixed times of prayer are they're markers for the day. Everything else lines up off of them. And there's one more thing. And this one is a comfort. When you keep that appointment, you carry something into the rest of the day. There's a quiet awareness in the back of your mind that you have already spoken with the Father about this day. The pressures still come. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that a fixed prayer time makes hard days easy. No, it doesn't. But the pressures don't define you the same way. Because you already handed the thing over. You've already placed the day into God's hands. So when it goes sideways at 2:15, you're not meeting it as a stranger to God. You're meeting it as somebody who already talked to Him about this morning. Now, there's more I want to say, but we're going to have to jump to the end here. So let's get to the practical. I want to give you 4 things you can act on before the sun goes down today. Number 1, pick a time and pick it now. Not sometime, not when things settle down today before you get out of the car or before the next thing starts up. Pick an actual time on an actual clock. It might be the first quiet moment after the kids are out the door. It might be the drive to work. Whatever it might be, specific times survive because vague intentions die. Number 2, set the alarm. Don't trust yourself to remember. Set the alarm. Number 3, keep it short enough that you'll never have an excuse. Start with a minute, 30 seconds. You pick. Number 4, pray something specific. The hardest thing about a short prayer time is not the time. It's standing there with nothing particular to say. So decide in advance. It might be the harvest prayer. It might be a short list of 3 people who don't know the Lord. It might be one thing you're asking God for. It could change from week to week, from day to day. But have it. Maybe even have it written down. Some of you are thinking, my job will not allow me to stop and pray at a set time. I'd say this. Nehemiah prayed in front of a king in the space of a breath. Nobody has to see this. Nobody has to hear it. The Father who is in secret sees in secret, and that is the entire arrangement. That's it. Some of you have a mind that wanders the second you close your eyes. Don't close them. Pray with your eyes open. If you need to, pray out loud in the car. The whole sentences. There's no rule about the eyes. And some of you have prayed at a set time for years, and you're wondering why nothing seems to be happening. Remember Nehemiah. He prayed and fasted and wept over Jerusalem for months before the king ever looked up and noticed his face. The long faithfulness looked like nothing right up until the day it looked like everything. Now I want to leave you with this. We live in a world that will fill every available minute you have, and it will do it for free. And it will do it so smoothly, you will never see it happen. So a fixed time for prayer is a quiet act of resistance. It's a small stake driven in the ground that says, this slot belongs to God. The culture doesn't get to claim it. My employer doesn't get to claim it. My phone doesn't get to claim it. This one's spoken for. And so here's my challenge for you. One short, consistent appointment. Choose it before you go to bed tonight. It does not have to be fancy, and it does not have to be long. Set it, keep it, and let it steady the hours around it. And if you're looking for a place to start where the dean of the school at Sunset did. Set an alarm for 9:38 in the morning, and when it goes off, wherever you are, just pray this. Lord of the harvest, send out workers into your harvest. And if you want to send me, here am I. Thank you for being here with me today. May the Lord bless you. Have a good day.
Ring it out, ring it out, ring it out.
This program was sponsored by North Valley Church of Christ.